Ruslan.
Yo, so I didn't know this, but you work at a church.
I work out of a church. I don't work at a church. I got fired from a church back in 2016, and I've never been employed by another church since.
What did you get fired from a church for?
I was a youth pastor, and the senior pastor and I, who used to be the youth pastor, he basically leveled up, and I was a volunteer, and then he leveled his assistant up to youth pastor, and then his assistant left, and then he brought me, the assistant, to the assistant youth pastor, who was the youth pastor, to be the assistant. I became the youth pastor, essentially, and me and the youth pastor quickly learned that, hey, this is not going to work, and I was given multiple sabbatical / humble thyself opportunities, and I thought, this isn't for me. This isn't for me. I don't think I want a career in ministry. At the moment,
was it methods, like a disagreeing of methods, or what was it that was like the final like straw that broke the camel's back?
It was definitely methods. I after Bible college, I graduated from Bible college 4 years, and I quickly kind of I grew tired of what was like youth, the lights and the pizzazz, and then I was the hype man. I was like the youth group hype man for a long time, and I don't know, man. Dude, every single Wednesday I'd go up and I'd impersonate Michael Jackson. I'd have him kill the lights. I even talked about like rappelling in one Sunday, but then I thought, I'd have to bolt stuff into the wall. Let's not do that. But I kind of grew tired with what. Like, you listen.
Oh, hold on. You was putting Kanye in to a church, also like some straight WWE Sting vibes, boom.
Dude, if my annual budget wasn't $5,000, then I would have done a lot.
Oh my gosh. So you're trying to kind of fit into this mold of being this kind of character within church youth culture, and then you become the youth pastor. Like you were the main speaking pastor.
Yeah, I was. So I had done all those things. I had opened up different camps and conferences, and had volunteered, and I'd been a camp counselor, all these things. And then I became the youth pastor. And then after I was not over, but trying to shepherd this group of 30, 40 something teenagers, I realized hey, none of that hype stuff works. Nobody cares about how good the light show was for worship music. And so I started to I would say row the opposite direction of what the church kind of wanted to do, Everybody's trying to row forward. And I thought, okay, well, let's go through let's read through the Bible. Let's have in-depth Bible study. And of course I wasn't the best spiritual leader at the time, and there were a lot of things that I did wrong, and I'll confess that. But I feel I just remember thinking this can't be it. People can't show up every Wednesday, and I just make them laugh, and then we go eat Applebee's every Wednesday. So that was just the internal struggle that I faced, and then became external with the leadership, just thinking, hey, I want to do more. Maybe let's not turn on the lights on a Wednesday. Maybe let's not blast Christian rap music, no problem with it, before and after each service. Maybe let's actually turn the music down. Let's converse, let's get to know people. Let's make it meaningful. And so I was voluntarily let go. That's what I tell people.
Was this a part of a mega church? This is a big church, or is this
No, it was. I've been using the term micro mega church, which doesn't make sense, but it's like a mega church. It's a small church that operated on a mega church mindset, So everything was the countdown and everything, and all these, you never miss a beat or whatever. But it's hey, for the youth ministry, hey, there's 30 people in here. Maybe I don't. Maybe we don't need a microphone. You know what I mean?
We may not need the fog machine and the cool light show for 30 people.
I'm asthmatic. I need a gas mask to get up through all this. Same thing was Sunday mornings. Sunday mornings was this. Dude, it's so funny. I'm going to tell this story here, and hopefully nobody from that church listens. But that church started doing 2 services, and I volunteered in kids ministry at the time, which is a whole nother. I got roped into being the kids church pastor, and I was oh, let me help out. Cut to a year later, I'm in there every single Sunday, and 2 services, mind you. And then one time the worship leader was like, hey, come, can you come do the opening prayer for first service? And I was like, yeah, sure. So I go in and bro, there is nobody. This is 9 a.m. There is just like the sound guy in the back, a deacon or two, and a greeter at the door. And I'm behind like this divider wall thing before I go up on stage, and the worship leader is there. And I'm like peeking. I'm looking up at the projector, and then I'm looking into the audience. And then I tell the worship leader, I'm like, yo, do I need to wait? And I remember he put his hand on my shoulder, and he just went, go up and do the opening prayer. And I went up, and I just thought, wow. So we're just gonna run this whole production well, as if, I tell people it's like the Emperor's New Clothes. We all just pretend, like, let's just pretend that he's clothed, all right? Let's just bow, and it's like, no, like, he's naked. Like, something's wrong. He's naked, all right?
So, okay, so I'm assuming the comedy was born out of a lot of these experiences, right? Like, you're telling me real stories, but they remind me of a lot of your skits, which are brilliant, by the way. You guys should all be following on social. So let me ask you this, because I think when you deeply care about something, the local church, Christianity, you tend to be a bit outspoken about it, or tend to be maybe a little critical of it, right? And is that kind of where the humor is from? That it's not from like being flippant and trying to dunk on Christians. It's actually to say, like a lot of this stuff that we've attached to Jesus, it's kind of nonsense. Like, it's kind of silly. And so poking fun at it almost becomes, I'm sure it's therapeutic for you, but it becomes therapeutic for guys like me that come from a very similar situation where, I wasn't fired, but they cut my, what's that called? Housing allowance. They sat me down and cut my housing allowance, which, like, that's the finesse, like, it's like half of your income's not taxed. And so they did that, and it was like, things kept happening, and I was already doing music, so I was like, you know what, like, screw it, I'm just gonna go pursue music, and that's what I really wanted to do anyway. So the question is this coming from a place of like, hey, I actually love the church, I love Jesus, I love Christianity, however, like, some of this stuff is goofy, guys. Can we do better? Like, so talk about that.
100%, man. Like, and I think that's what, I don't know. You do a great job. Let me just compliment you. You do a great job of taking really intense topics of pop culture or things that are happening currently, and then breaking them down and explaining them for people on YouTube. And YouTube, this is the perfect platform for that.
Thank you.
Whereas I don't have those words. If you're approaching it from a place of comedy, it's like, hey, I don't know what else to say. All these are just really, really big concept things, like the church and what is worship like, and what is a guest speaker supposed to do, and what is a church intern supposed to do. So I know what it's not, I know what it's not, and I know what a lot of it is, which I've heard all the stories, and I compare notes, like, with whether it's Instagram comments or just like stories that I've seen, or, just being at camps and conferences and talking to people. I'm like, oh, wow, we all have the same experience, even though we're all from different parts of the US or different parts of the world. So it does come from that. And it just happens to be like a kid that I used to go to church with. He was in my youth ministry. His name is PD, Paul David. We co-write a bunch of these things together. And it was like this, back row kind of cynicism and jokes, and like, what was that? Like, what did he say? What did he mean? We're at a conference making fun of the guest speaker, and so we were like, oh, let's approach our comedy and the sketches and songs with that in mind. But it doesn't come from like this hateful place,
right?
Because if it came from a hateful place, I wouldn't spend all this time doing all the research. You know what I mean? Like, that's what people don't understand. You think I go to church every Sunday for material? I just happen to notice, all the quirky, weird things that are not weird, that are like common or okay. Right. It's like, well, okay, let's not. Maybe not to everybody.
I did a video recently, man, and I did a video on why I'm so hard on conservatives and why I'm so harsh on conservatives. And I basically was like, you guys are supposedly the adults in the room, and like you're acting worse than the children by always like attacking the quote unquote children. And then it's like you're never known by the things you're for. You're always known by the things you're against. And people get really mad at me for like, talking about like the issues with fundamentalism, the issues with legalism, the issues with the religious right. And it's like, fam, like I say these things because I care. Like I say these things because I think there's a better way, not because I want to smear the church or make fun of the church. I genuinely feel like we could do so much better in culture, in society, in local churches, how we engage. And it's tough articulating that because people always assume the worst intent. Like they assume the worst possible motives instead of saying like, man, like what's the heart and the messaging behind this? And can I find alignment? And so I know you've kind of gotten backlash in your comments and people thinking you're of Satan and all kinds of wild stuff.
Hey, that's a feature, not a bug. that comes with it. Yeah.
Talk about that. What's that been like for you to like make stuff that is good? And I do believe it glorifies Jesus. Like I do believe your stuff glorifies Jesus. And kind of being, drugged for it.
Man, I love having conversations like this. We would have this whether we were recording it and live streaming it or not. But I think that's a lot of the opportunities that it's opened up. And when people throw out jabs and comments like that, well, I'm like, man, this is like the wrong platform, man. I can't. What am I going to do? I'm going to comment a jab and then you're going to jab and then I'm going to, and then, you know what I mean? It's like, it's not the place, but I want to talk about these things. We made a song last year called Worship Song, which is just basically like a fake worship song. And the people were like, oh, this is making fun of what about people who are moved by the worship songs? And I'm like, well, that's all good. And like, I've also been, that comment kind of implies like, I don't love worship music. I love worship music.
Right.
But making a note or kind of the fact that it is kind of repetitive, it's kind of vague. Fire always rhymes with desire in every song. Like, hey, like if we call out those aspects of it, like let's enjoy that. Let's make fun of that. And you're still gonna catch me raising my hands and worshiping at Greenville Community Church where I go to church at.
Right.
But it's hard for people to kind of like hold those two things at the same time. It's like, oh, you're making fun of a preacher, you're a terrible Christian. Well, touch not the Lord's anointed. Well, I'm like, hey, okay, a couple months ago, I opened up the floodgates and I put up a story. I'm like, hey, what is something that you heard a pastor say in a church that didn't make headlines? What is something just nuts that a pastor said in church?
Yeah.
And dude, the responses that I got back, I got maybe a few thousand responses, just DMs, and it was crazy. So there is this. All of us have been in a church context where we've heard somebody like go off the rails or say something nuts about you name it, whether it's politics, sexuality, marriage, sex, dating, all these things, and all. I don't know. Like some people just go, "Wow, that was kind of wild," but yeah, it's fine. But I'm like, "Hey, that's not okay. That's not okay that somebody said that." And we're all as like Christians, we're conditioned to kind of go like, "Hey, well, he said that, but he's the leader, and he's the pastor, and I don't want to. I thought it was weird. No, it's worse than weird. That's bad theology, right?
Yeah.
Like." We can't let these people slide. So even making jokes like that, I'm like, why are you holding me accountable? Why don't you hold the people who have said worse things on the record and have stand by what they said to a higher regard? So it's like, no, attack, come at the comedian.
Yeah. Well, because comedy oftentimes just reflects reality, right? Like it pokes fun of. And that's why I titled like the thumbnail, like if it wasn't funny, if it wasn't true, it wouldn't be funny. That's what makes your stuff funny. Like it's true. We watch it and we go, holy smokes. Like I've seen the guy. I've seen the cool hip preacher. Like I've seen that guy. Yeah. I've seen the super duper emo love songs to Jesus. You know what I mean? Like I've seen these things. And so that's what makes it true. What makes it true is that it's funny, and I think it's just unexpected that somebody would be so bold as to poke at something that is like, oh, this is sacred. Let's not don't touch the Lord's anointed, kind of this kind of not, this kind of like thinking, but it's prevalent. So let me ask you this, because so many questions I really do have for you. What do you think like church culture plays into the deconversion conversation, people walking away from the faith, right? Deconstructing the faith. And the more I hear about it, the more I sit and really listen to people. I mean, I got a DM today and I'm like, okay, so like, tell me, like, what's your issue? And it's like, it's never like the issue is with Jesus or the historical validity for the resurrection, the early church believing the resurrection was literal, right? Yeah. It's always, well, fill in the blank of this camp that was super radical and fundamental. Oh, well, this, or well, right? Like somebody told me today, bro, they were like, but they basically were like double predestination. And I'm like, as if you have to, like, as if you have to accept double. Like I got Reformed brothers that are like predestination. You know what I'm saying? Yeah. But like to go like double predestination, it's like, fam, like how do you equate that with God? Like how do you equate something that like isn't commonly held by all Christians worldwide? And maybe because I just have a global perspective as well, and I want to get into that as well. But like this heaviness that we're seeing, a lot of people walk away from the faith, lose their faith, deconvert, deconstruct. How much of that do you think is connected directly to church culture, churchianity, and not an attack of Jesus, but like, fam, like I feel like I've been cornered into a room, and it seems like y'all are saying this is Christianity, take it or leave it. And I don't know if that's right. Like this doesn't, and I'm not saying it's all about feelings, but like this doesn't seem right. The way we treat these people, the way we speak about these things. I just, and what I think it is, I think it's their imago Dei. I think it's the image of God and the law of God written on their hearts that's in conflict with this very real church culture thing. So I'm curious to hear your thoughts on that, because I know, you have a background, and I'm sure you've dealt with doubt and tough questions and all that kind of stuff. So what do you make of all of that together?
Man, I will say, so I grew up Pentecostal. I was born in 92, so I grew up Pentecostal, man. So I went through church Sunday morning, Sunday night, Wednesday night, and there was this understanding of, just like an unspoken, like, this is what we do. This is what we do. Everything that we did was, this is what we do. And so we weren't allowed to like ask questions, in a way. So I remember the first time I had brought up to my parents when I'm kind of going through deconstruction back before everybody else was. No, I'm just kidding. But, back when I was going through it myself, and I kind of realized, like, hey, I don't know how much of this I understand, or how much of this, like, I want to bring up. And even bringing up to my parents, like, what is this? I know I was filled with the Holy Spirit at a camp when I was 11, but what was that? What's the purpose of that in my day-to-day? What's the purpose of that in big gatherings? Tithe. I was told all the time, like, my dad would give me $10 and he'd go, hey, 10% of that, which is $1, needs to go back to the storehouse where you're spiritually fed. And I remember bringing those things up, and I was like, well, no, that's because we've always done that. Or we lay hands on the sick and they shall be healed. I remember there were all these things that were just like understood. And I remember asking questions, like asking my parents, like, what does this mean? And I think now a lot of people my age, instead of buckling down and having those conversations, they just pieced out. They just left, They went to college and they realized, like, hey, I'm tired of giving my money to another church. I'm tired of seeing people collect thousands of dollars and then still ask to still collect money to donate to a thing and to do a thing. And I think that's where a lot of it was. I remember a pastor once said, the church is people, and people are messy. And I think now, where we are now, like, a lot of us are okay with wrestling with the mess and talking to each other about sin and what church needs to be and how we're supposed to conduct ourselves in whatever kind of, like, as parents. Like, I find myself with your dad, like, talking to other guys who are dads. I'm like, hey, like, what are you doing? Hey, this is how I feel. Hey, let's do this. But at the time, it's like, fatherhood for the glory of God, and raise up a child in the way that you should go. And it's like, yeah, okay, but how? How do I do that? I don't need like a Bible verse. How do I do that? How do I become a better husband? How do I become a better employee? How do I become a better businessman? Well, give and it shall be given back to you. Yes, but how, to where, to how, to when, to who. So, and I think there were just so many, like whack-a-mole, like so many questions that arose were just kind of like put down the moment that they were brought up, that I think people got tired of that, and they left. And even that they try to come back, and that's really sad. I remember in youth ministry when I was like a volunteer, we were always telling people, hey, invite somebody, bring somebody. And then, we'd like give a pizza party or tacos to the person and their guests, who they brought to that Wednesday. But I mean, thinking back on it, the preaching was not it. Like, so we were essentially just inviting people to come get railed over the coals and then eat a Taco Bell taco in like a VIP area. And then we were wondering why they didn't come back. And it's like, well, that person didn't glean anything that was helpful to their soul. That person didn't glean anything that was helpful in their life, in their schooling, in their career, and what they want to do. We essentially were just like creating, hey, you bring people because somebody brought you, because Jesus is pleased when there are more people in seats. And it's like, okay, but for what reason though? What reason? And I think people are asking those questions now. And the people who are winning, the leaders and the people in ministry who are winning, are the people who are humble enough to sit down and have those conversations with other people. Because without it, I think we're going to lose, man. I think we're going to lose people. We already are.
I think about my own life, and I'm probably similar to you in that, like, I went and, like, I came to the faith through, I guess, almost like a deconstruction process. Like, I grew up Armenian Orthodox, very weird, like almost Catholic type. There's some church hurt there early on. And then once I started coming around like a seeker-friendly church, the very first thing I was confronted with was like all of the big questions, like, is Jesus God? Like, is the Bible reliable, right? And I was talking to a Jehovah's Witness girl, and I was like, why are they asking for money? Like, what is this thing, right? Like, and so I was going to like a seeker-friendly church, but I was also like reading the Jehovah's Witness stuff, and then I had friends that like were Muslim, so I was like studying the Quran, and I was really working through a lot of this stuff fairly early on. At least the big questions, like the big question. I wasn't afraid to ask, like, why y'all say Jesus God? Because it says he's the Son of God, right? I had to sort that out early on in the process. So it's very funny to me that like that's now a thing. And I think I was blessed by like coming to the faith as a skeptic with all the heavy questions up front and having to like sort through these things up front. And then also just kind of looking at the church like, this is a very imperfect institution, because I was already hurt by imperfect institutions, and I already see how this institution does not always treat people the way they should be treated. And then what happened was, though, is that I started just kind of taking God at his word. Like, I was like, okay, you know what? Like, all right, like, I'm 17, 18. I don't understand this whole tithing thing. Like, whatever. But you know what? I'll try it, right? And then it would just be like miraculous things would happen in my finances, right? Just like things that, like, I'll tell you a quick story, bro. Somebody broke into my car when I had a 84 two-door Celica, Toyota Celica, right? And I had like my speakers in the trunk were bigger than my rims. Okay, that's the energy I was on. I got these big old speakers in the trunk, and somebody broke in and like stole my speakers, stole my stereo. This is when people did that kind of thing out of my own apartment. And I like called the police, and they came, they did a report, they did the whole like fingerprint thing, whatever. And I forgot about it. Like, I literally forgot about it. And bro, like, my first month I was tithing, like 8, 9, 10 months later, I get a check in the mail for like $900. I was like 17 years old at the time. I just started going to church, just started trying this whole like giving thing. And it was because they found the kid who did it based on fingerprints. They were like out here on some CSI. Like, when is the police doing this kind of CSI work?
That's the only time any type of forensics like that has worked. Right. They got mad terabytes of fingerprints somewhere, dude. That's the only time.
Bro, they find this kid who lives around the corner. I don't know who he is, and run his fingerprints. catch him doing something else, make him pay restitution to me. I don't even know about it. And then like 9 months later, as I'm coming to the faith and starting to give, I get like a $900 check in the mail. And so like there would be these things, and I know that's like some of you guys would be like, oh, it's a coincidence. No. Like for me, that was very real. Like that was very real as a kid to get, especially this is 2001. So adjust that for inflation. Like that was a lot of money at the time. And I kept like, all right, like, let me read Proverbs every day, a chapter of Proverbs. Like, let me try to really live life God's ways, like the basics, like do unto others, love your neighbor as yourself, right? Give more than you take, be generous, plan for, and the more I kept living life God's ways, there was just always this like supernatural manifestation. Even though I did it flawed and messy and was sometimes kind of a jerk about it, there was always this faithfulness that God would have to me. And so I wasn't afraid to ask the hard questions. And I also wasn't afraid to just be like, man, like these things are true, not because a pastor told me. These things are true because I like really said, all right, like I'm going to go in, and I'm not going to be like, I was never the guy that like went on a missionary trip but when I was broke, right? Like I was never that, those folks that are like, oh, God called me to go to, Zimbabwe. And then they just like, don't got no money and just make dumb, like I was never that guy.
Now you're broke in Zimbabwe.
Right, now you're broke in Zimbabwe, right? I was never that guy. There was always like a wisdom to my faith. And it just, I don't know. It's just always been true. Like it's been true even though I don't have all the answers.
Yeah. Now let me in the same vein of what you're talking about. I grew up in like the you lay hands on the sick and they will recover. A couple years ago, 3 or 4 years ago, my dad was diagnosed with cancer, and he was a missionary back in Tanzania. He was a missionary in like Central Africa, and the whole denomination, everybody who knew him, Facebook, we're praying for my father. And we're praying every single day. And we're all people of faith. He is a minister. He's doing great ministry. We want him to continue to live and to do that. And I remember I was visiting Tanzania one January. I was visiting, and I was going to be there for like 3 weeks, and then a week into it, 7 days later, my dad passes away. And I remember being spiritually and emotionally just kind of wrecked. And my mom, who was spiritually stronger than I was, also we were all kind of taken aback because, God heals people, right? God heals people. And my father had been giving, I can't think of a better Christian, a better father, a better leader, a more kind, gracious, loving man. And all of a sudden, I'm in the back of I'm in a hearse with my dad's casket in the back while I'm on a trip visiting my parents. And so that really kind of, I was like, okay, so, and my father-in-law has a story where he was doing, the whole reason why my wife's family moved to South Carolina was to get into business. And they had a great business plan with a family member. It was all drawn out. It was going to be amazing. They were supposed to make a ton of money. And they didn't. The business deal fell through. He's here with 4 kids now. They're from the Midwest. He moved here with 4 kids. He had to file for bankruptcy. And the stories that he's told me and my wife has told me, and he was also like a minister, an evangelist. He worked for ministries in the past and was giving to missionaries and tithing and all these different things. And he was talking just this past weekend. He was saying, it's like, you need to, what if that doesn't happen? Like, what if you're doing all these things for the Lord and all these different things, and what your understanding of how you're supposed to be taken care of doesn't happen? Is God still good? And the answer is yes. Is God still faithful? And the answer is yes. And I think there's like this school of thought that I'm telling my mom about currently. My mom is like the typical African mom. People who have African moms will relate. She's always sending me WhatsApp links and all these like bad theology preachers. And I'm telling my mom, and I'm like, hey, listen, by proclaiming something, it's not always going to work. By not saying COVID in your household doesn't mean that COVID is not going to enter your household. By decreeing wealth and health, doesn't automatically going to bring us wealth and health. And so, yeah, man.
How did you reconcile that? Like, my best friend when I was 19 tragically died from pneumonia. He was overweight, and bro, we were there, like with the anointing oil, hands laid, whoever the guy at the church was that did the thing with the healing, he was there. Like everybody was there, and he tragically dies. We just had somebody in our community, bro. In our extended community, she was someone that we were close with. 35 years old, mother of 4, tragically dies of breast cancer. This happened Saturday, right? And then, I'm like, and I remember being back in that place when my buddy Big Mike died when I was 19. He was 20, and just being in a place of like, Lord, like, if there's ever a candidate to heal somebody, right? Like it would be these people. And for whatever reason, it doesn't happen. And I'm 100% with you in terms of like, man, we can't control the tragedy that life is going to throw at us, right? So like, there's a natural trajectory that we will go on if we live wise, but we also can't control tragedy and unforeseen circumstances and living in a fallen world and all these different things. So for you, how did you reconcile that with your dad? Like, I mean, it sounds like who better to get healed than your dad, right? And how did you reconcile? How did your mom reconcile that? Because it seems like your mom's still kind of on that, like, proclaim it energy,
Man, it was tough, just especially for me, because here I am. I'd gone through, I'd been fired by a church at the time. I was here. I was working for a production company. I'm making videos. My dad actually passed away like a week, almost like a week after my first video had done 1 million views. So here I'd been making content for all this time, and he had, and finally I'm like, oh wow, I might actually have a chance. And then he passes away, and there's this, I don't know, I realized that I thought I deconstructed, and I thought I'm believing the right thing, and my understanding of God is correct, and my understanding of who God is and how he moves is correct. And then getting, kind of completely blindsided by that made me kind of think and realize, like, okay, wait a second. Am I still in like the name it and claim it understanding? Am I still is God like the cosmic, vending machine that I go to him with all my problems and my dilemmas? Yeah, man. I think for me, it really, and I'm not trying to sound like morbid, but it really taught me that life, because I'd never lost anybody, I would say, near and dear to me, until my father. So I was like, wow, we really have to go through life, and we have to pray and spend our finances and spend time with family, with our hands kind of held open, because none of that is ours. Health isn't ours. Wealth isn't ours. A successful ministry, which at the time I was trying to grow and I was a youth pastor, and all of a sudden I'm getting booted. That time was also very dark for me, just because my identity was in ministry. My identity was the people, and all of a sudden nobody's hitting me up. I'm not hosting bonfires in my backyard. I'm not going to church on Sundays. I'm not sitting with a bunch of people. I'm not cutting up on Wednesdays. All of a sudden it's just me. Delivering pizza and going home, and my identity had been ministry. And at the time, like when my dad passed away, my identity had been like, God is good, and everything that he does is good, and God's gonna make a way where there seems to be no way. And in that scenario, God did make a way, and I didn't like the way, but I'm like, hey, that's who God is, and that's be okay. That's okay, and I'm gonna be okay. But at the time, I remember I walked out of the hospital room after some nurses had told us some news, and I was just with my mom. And I remember I'm telling my mom, like, what are you going to do? What are you going to do? Like, I'm like distraught. What are you going to do? Because in my mind, I didn't have a universe. I didn't think about a universe where my dad wasn't there, So, and my mom, remember, she practically grabbed me by the shoulder. She's like, we're going to keep on trusting Jesus. God is faithful. God is good. And in that moment, it wasn't just like, they weren't just platitudes. They weren't just things that, weren't just Band-Aids for bullet wounds. It was like, oh, wow, God really is good. I think I've been saying that, but I didn't really believe it. So, yeah, it really just kind of elevated my faith, and elevated just my understanding of of the world. Now I can, come kind of empathize with people who have lost somebody, because at the times like, oh, so and so passed away. I'm like, oh, well, whatever. But I'm like, after you go pick the flowers and the soup, and all these things for somebody, and you're like, wow, life is temporary, and God has designed it in this way to kind of keep us, not, I don't know if the word is humble, but to kind of keep us in this understanding of, hey, like, you think you're all high and mighty, you think you got something going on, like, oh, you think you've collected. For me, it's like, oh, you think millions of views is awesome, and no, that doesn't mean anything. That doesn't mean anything, because one day I'm gonna be, my family members are gonna be in a car behind a hearse that I'm in.
Jeez, man, that's such a good perspective, and even in, like, I'm about praying bold prayers. Like, I'm about praying for healing and breakthrough and flourishing. But I also know God is God, and God's ways of doing things are different. It's just like, man, I don't get to command and decree anything. Like, I could say, God, like, hey, man, this would be great. I'm going to do my input. I'm going to input what I can input to make these things happen, right? Just whatever, career, views, whatever you're talking about, right? But at the end of the day, like, you don't really have control, as much control as you think you do. And I think when the place that I'm in, and I could just, even what you were talking about with your dad, man, like, you just realize how fragile life is, and how you don't really have as much control as you think you do. Like, we have a perception of control, but you're not really in control, because you don't really know what can happen. Like, I took my 4-month-old on a walk today, just around, my wife was homeschooling my son. We're that family, by the way. We homeschool.
I was homeschooled too, man. I'm raising 2 kids who are about to be homeschool graduates.
Respect. And I was walking with my daughter, and I'd never taken my daughter just even around the block. And I was sitting there walking, man, and I was walking around with her, and I felt how exposed I was, and how, like, yes, I'm here and I'm protecting my daughter and I'm just walking around the block, but like anything could have happened, right? Like, anything could. And I started going through these, like, worst case scenarios, and I'm like, should I go get the strap, like, before I take these walks? Like, and I'm not like in a bad, terrible area, but it was like, man, how fragile is life? And yet, in the midst of that, God is good. And all I could really go back to is, when I think about these things, I just think, man, like, Jesus on the cross, like, that didn't make sense. How God used that to the disciples at the time. They were expecting this kingdom. They were expecting this political leader overthrowing the Romans, all this stuff, and then, like, their guy ends up naked on a cross, telling them to take care of his mom. His mom is there, and none of that made sense to them at the time. And I think the suffering doesn't make sense in the moment. And I don't know how it makes sense. I would say in my life, like, having been a survivor of sexual assault and all these different things, like, they make sense in hindsight. They make sense decades from now, from when it happened. But some things you just don't have the answer to. Like, I don't have the answer, like, why my best friend died when he was 19. I was 19, he was 20, of, like, pneumonia. Like, that didn't make any sense. So I love what you said, bro, because I think it is a degree of humility. It is a, like, you don't really know anything. Like, we're grasping at straws at the end of the day.
And I think, I mean, it is like we took a like a hard pivot from comedy, but I think that's where I'm gonna be honest, man. I'm not, like, the smartest person. But I remember being a part of working for a church, and I still, even when I'm at church today in conferences and camps, I just remember thinking, I'm like, man, think about this now when I'm at events and churches, like, this needs to be like this needs to be like a KO. This needs to be like a grand slam. We don't have time, like the loose cannon guest speaker. Like, we don't have time to entertain people who aren't about kingdom business, and aren't about teaching people about God and the Bible and explaining that well, because like, life hangs on the balance, right? Like, souls are in the balance, people's futures, people's careers and how they do, and the families and generations kind of hang in the balance. And I know that's not to say somebody who preaches. There is a verse that says, those who teach will be judged more strictly. Yeah. But there is this kind of like this flippancy that people go about it with, and this like there's just like a lack of seriousness. Not that it needs to be like only business all the time. Yeah. But I think people kind of forget. People are like, well, we just go to church on Sundays. And well, no, what if somebody's going to church? I remember, people, my professor in college said, I preach as if my 18-year-old son is on the back row and this is his last chance. This is his last chance that he's giving me and God. And this is it. I'm preaching that person. At the same time I'm preaching, he would say, I want to preach to the 8-year-old on the second row. I want her to understand what I'm saying. There's that might be too specific for some people, but there are people who kind of speak or they get up and they just go, hey, this is like the me show. This is hey, God's been good and God's been faithful and I've healed this. I've been praying for the sick and they healed and I resurrected. What about the people in the audience who have not seen victories like you're talking about? What about the people whose finances they've been working on for years and they're not at the place where you are? What about the people who haven't seen a victory and we're just proclaiming and singing all these things? But I think church needs to be kind of inclusive for people who are all in those different spaces, whether you grew up in church like I did or not, as opposed to, hey, come on in, one size fits all, you're welcome. Are you sick? Come up front. Well, not without sounding morbid, but it's like, hey, let's live and sing and pray and worship and learn together with the understanding that there is more that we don't understand. There are books and things that people that we can continually glean from, but this isn't it. This isn't it. Whatever this conversation, this isn't it. The Wednesday night isn't it, but we need to treat it, the Sunday morning, we need to treat it as if, treat those people in that context as important and as if like, hey, like this is helping form your theology. Like the songs that we sing, that's helping you form your theology, your understanding of God, the messages that are preached. So I remember, if you're gonna open up with jokes and be all flippant about it, like you're doing a disservice to people who are like, hey, I need help. Right. I'm at the end of my road here, and I think that's what the church kind of needs to be for a lot of those people, and it hasn't been that. And some churches are though. Some churches are.
Yeah. I love that because I think it's like a twofold thing that the church could be if we're because we're kind of dreaming here, right? The church can be both, meaning that for the person that hasn't had anything or is coming from poverty like I was, the church can be that bridge on literally pulling people out and giving people resource and access and pathways that, like, had I not been in a church, I wouldn't have been exposed to financial literacy. I wouldn't have been exposed to entrepreneurship. I wouldn't have been exposed to a lot of the stuff that I was exposed to. That was and I wouldn't have been able to try so many things. I got to try video broadcasting because I was at a church. I got to try so much of what I'm doing now because I was in a local church. So it's like the church literally created a pathway for me that if I wasn't in a church, I probably wouldn't have had access to thousands of dollars of cameras to record sermons on and understand YouTube and right. But I think the flip side of that is for the person that is suffering, this Jesus helps make sense of the suffering, right? That it's not a crutch, but it gives you some perspective and it helps you. That faith helps you make sense of this. So it's just like from one standpoint, it's pulling people up because of, I would say, this diversity of socioeconomic backgrounds. Like I wouldn't have been around people who were making multi-six figures, but I was in life groups with them. Right now, I'm in life groups with people that do 7 figures, and it's because of the church, right? But then when things are good, when things are amazing, it becomes that very real, let me give you a utility for making sense of your suffering, because Jesus said, like, in this world you will have suffering. And I think it could be and both, right? It should be. And I don't know, I guess, like, I see such a practical utility to Christianity people call me like I'm too pragmatic sometimes, right? But I see there's a utility to faith. There's a practical side of faith that I think is so important to the average person walking around, whether it's being pulled up or whether it's, hey, this is how you make sense of the suffering. And I don't know, to your point, I don't know if we take the business as seriously. I don't think if we're as urgent outside of like the eternal, because that's also on the line. Like the eternal side is on the line. There's real things that hang in the balance, and I wish we had more urgency instead of like, oh man, you make fun of Christians, you're a bad guy, or like critical race theory, oh, it's ruining America. Like it's just like so many things that we are sidetracked. Meanwhile, there's people really hurting that really need answers.
Yeah, and the fact that we're talking about this right now, and people have been listening to you and all your videos, and there are so many other people kind of speaking out about this, as you know, as much as people make fun of like deconstruction or whatnot. I think it is kind of it is igniting like a lot of healing among a lot of people, because now all of a sudden, you know, I'm my pastor now, Pastor Michael Bain here at Greenville Community Church. Like he's one of those guys, like whether we're in a parking lot or he sees me here at the church kind of coming or going, we'll talk, and he'll ask me like, hey, what are your thoughts on this? Hey, did you read this article about this pastor or about this thing, or what are your thoughts on that? And he'll share those with me, and there's this realness that I've told him to his face, and I've told other people, and I'm like, I've longed for that from a pastor, from like a leader, and I haven't had that for a long time, because there was just kind of like this is essentially like an NPC, you know, just kind of like a, hey, handshake, God bless you, see you next Sunday type thing. And I'm like, hey, like, what, help, not only just help me, like, well, where are you at? Where are you at in terms of, where were you at when you were fathering a 2-year-old, like where I'm at now, you know, like what did you do? And the realness of that, of hey, like it was, I trust Jesus and God was good, but it was hard, you know. That in and of itself, I mean, has helped me. Multitudes are like, hey, I'm my first year of marriage. Hey, this is confusing, and I'm lost. Oh, what am I doing? I'm like, hey, it's gonna be like that, you know. But you know, stuff. We're able to. People aren't afraid to confess of you know their shortcomings or their fears or their worries in certain matters, and I think that's part of being human. That's part of faith. That's part of being like, hey, like I've been in diner booths with grown men who've also lost somebody, and I'm telling them about, you know, losing my dad. Now we're 2 grown men crying over hash browns. You know what I mean? And I'm like, hey, this is okay, and this is helpful. And I look back on those moments where I'm like, was this ever a thing? Like, I hope that more people can experience this. I hope that more people don't come across good men of faith, and they're just kind of like, hey, man, go with God, you know, and you just go and break down somewhere else. But we need to, you know, bear each other's burdens. You know, weep with those who weep and rejoice with those who rejoice. And the content just kind of hopefully sheds light on, hey, let's laugh together. But hey, this is the problem. And the Instagram reels I've made this year have racked up over 10 million views. So I'm like, hey, maybe there is a problem. Mainly because more people are enjoying it than I would have ever thought in my entire life. I can't conjure up 10 million people out of thin air. Yeah. All right.
Yeah, maybe you're onto something. I got one last question, and we'll see if you guys got questions in the chat. Just write questions in all capital and then drop your questions, and we'll try to get to a few of them. Do you think my last question is, do you think the stuff that you're doing with the humor, do you think that some of the funny stuff that's kind of dysfunctional, that's kind of wonky, it's kind of weird, do you think that is a byproduct of this like Western Protestant, you know, European Christianity that's very narrow? A lot of times if we pull back and we say, okay, let's look at like historical Christianity, like across all the schisms, across like the Catholic Church, the, you know, Armenian, Ethiopian Orthodox, the regular Orthodox, like the Indian Orthodox, like there's such a broad Christianity that all agrees on like the creeds and these like essential things that we hold near and dear. And they might have some differences or different views of church tradition or the influence of, whatever, the church discipline, right? But do you think so much of what we're dealing with here is because we have such a narrow view of what it is to be a Christian? And then you like narrow it down. So you go from like, all right, like you have this schism, and then you got Protestants, protesting the Catholic Church. And then it's like protest after protest after protest, then the Pentecostals protest, and then the Assemblies of God then protest the Pentecostals, or whichever order that was in, right? And so you got all these like protests, and now we're so fragmented and we're all over the place, but there's no central unifying like system where in other pockets of Christianity that there is. And it looks a little less goofy sometimes. And then here, and I would say the backgrounds we're coming from, it's really like a bunch of independent churches kind of just doing their thing. Yeah.
Man, what was the question? Repeat the question again. You're too intellectual, my man.
If we had a more global view of Christianity, and churches had a more global view. So we didn't view like we're the right church because we're the savior of the world, right? But it's like, no. We're just one branch that God is using, and God's using believers in Ghana, and God's using the underground church in China. And they're not all Protestant, by the way. Like, and then there's the Ethiopian church, and then there's the Armenian church, and then there's even some Catholics. You know what I'm saying? Like, there's even some Catholics. And God's using all of these different people, and maybe that'll keep us a bit more humble and maybe not act as goofy with some of the church culture that we just make normal.
I mean, you kind of asked the question and then you answered it. I have stopped. I live in South Carolina. A lot of people out here love to talk about race, and a lot of people love to talk about whatever policy should look like. Mm-hmm. And then I quickly realized, I'd get into conversations with people, not hostile, not screaming matches. Somebody would just say something, and then I remember my dad one time said, he was like, we were somewhere, and my dad heard somebody say something. We all heard it, and on the drive home, he was like, hey, you know why they talk like that? And I was like, no, and he just goes, because they haven't traveled. And I'm like, oh yeah. So anytime somebody talks about Christianity in the Western Church or whatever, my first question, and it's not like a gotcha, but it's kind of like, hey, have you ever been on a mission trip? Have you ever been out of the country? Mm-hmm. And if that person has said no, I just I put this conversation into like a different column. Mm-hmm. Now I don't write off that person, but there is just so much more to Christianity and to worship, and to loving the Lord and preaching and teaching than whatever you kind of grew up in. And I know this because I was born in Tanzania, moved to the States when I was 2. From 2 to 11, I attended a Pentecostal church in the South, and I went to Pentecostal churches and a couple of other denominational churches in the United States. And then I went to Tanzania, and all of a sudden, the worship is different. The preaching is different. The questions people ask are different. The Eastern kind of mindset of interpreting scripture. And then I learned to speak Swahili, the language in Tanzania. And all of a sudden I'm reading the Bible in Swahili. And the interpretations are different. And I'm conversing and I'm talking, and I still have conversations with my mom, or somebody like, hey, what does that verse say in Swahili? Okay, but yes. So there are people who kind of go, this is how it should be, and this is how it should always be, and this is what but that's kind of like, hey, are you leaving? We'll take, for example, there's the church growth curriculums and booklets. It's like, hey, reach 3 people, and then they reach 3 people, and it kind of looks like a pyramid scheme. But then they're like, hey, pick up somebody in your car to go to church with, when you're driving to church on Sunday. Take them a fruit basket. Hey, guess what other cultures, people in South America or Africa, people've got fruit. It's sense. Nobody has a car. A majority of people don't have a car. So you can't just pick up. So there are whole chapters of these books about, hold the door open, Christian dating, take a girl out on it. Well, other cultures aren't going on dates. They're not going to the movies. You know what I mean? So there is this understanding of like Christian, like church, that has been exported out to different countries. And once you've been to a different country and you kind of hold the two, side by side, you kind of go, oh, wait a second. I don't think that works here, because people don't hang out at coffee shops. Or I don't think that works here because small groups look very different, because people's houses look very different.
Hello.
So
it's so good, bro. One of the most refreshing things that I did is my first language is Russian, and just going and hearing the gospel in another language.
Yeah.
Just kind of like the brain is just something different.
It's amazing, man. It really is. And then watching the people respond to that. And I've heard so many different stories. I grew up a missionary kid, so I know so many missionaries. And just the stories that they've said, like in particular, I heard a lady was telling me in Papua New Guinea, she's down there, she's helping translate the books of the Bible, the Bible to people in Papua New Guinea. It's indigenous. They speak different languages. So they're having missionaries down there learning the language and translating it and working with people in translating it. And they would pass out, a page or a chapter or whatever level was available to the people. And I remember they were passing them out, as the story goes, they were passing them out as they were translating them. And finally one day they passed out, like, I think it was like Matthew chapter 1, where it goes through the genealogies. And all of a sudden, like the interpreter who was with them, when he read it, was like, wow. And then he took it to the people of the village, and the people were like, what? And then come to find out, they all gather back to where, the little headquarters where they had set up to translate the Bible. And they were like, wow, this is how we know that people are real, by their generations and the way this was outlined. Now we understand that what these pages that you've been giving us, these are real stories of real people that really happen. We didn't think about it like that, but so even that in and of itself, where I've heard pastors, how many times have you heard a pastor here kind of talk about that and like make a joke about it? Oh, I'm going to skip over the names, they're too hard to say. Whereas other people look at that and they're like, this is real. My middle name in Tanzania, my middle name legally is Kundale, which is my dad's first name. My dad's middle name is Moses. All of his siblings' middle names, they're also Moses. So it follows that, that Joshua, son of Nun, like in the Bible, I'm Shama Kundale, Elishama Kundale Mrema, meaning that I'm the son of. That in American culture kind of doesn't make sense, because it's like, oh, well, my parents just picked out a middle name for me. It's Allen or whatever. But when you go to different cultures and you see how widespread other things are, you're like, wow, it really does parallel the Bible. And it's just beautiful, man. It really is. I don't want to sound like I'm at my wit's end, but it's traveling, reading the Bible, being a Christian, whether you can travel or not. I think I'm not trying to discredit people who have not traveled. Even talking to somebody from a different culture, that's one of my favorite things. Yeah. Talking to somebody from a different culture, like I can't talk to you enough. But it really does just kind of open up your eyes to how massive and global this Christianity thing is, man. This Jesus thing really is, and to make fun of what has become common here, to make fun of it, this is a fraction of of the whole, but the whole thing is complete. God's in charge of it. It's going, it's a bus. And that bus is going to continue on, and that's not to borrow a rise and fall of Mars Hill analogy. That bus, God's in control of that bus. You know what I mean?
That's good. Let's do a couple questions and then we'll get out of here. There's some good ones. Okay, Isaac asked, do you think we should look at typical Sunday in a different way to have more things in this discussion? Is it bad to think that a typical Sunday is not enough? It's a great question.
Listen, I have this conversation weekly with people. I don't know. Is the one thing that I think of is, did we build a cruise ship when we needed to have speedboats or rafts? I don't know. I know people who work for big churches, and I don't know. I work for a church. I was the camera. I was the camera guy, and I remember multiple Sundays thinking, okay, my week as a paid employee of the church kind of went to changing the backdrop of the youth room. And by Wednesday night, I'm kind of thinking, was this it? I think about that just kind of like it takes a lot of people to make the machine work. Some people love rowing. They love being a part of that machine. I personally, my mindset, the way my brain works, didn't work like that. I don't know.
First of all, that's a great answer. I don't know, because we don't really know what we're talking about when it comes to like the church trajectory, and you know what I'm saying? We don't really know what like the how that works. What I will say is I think the internet has made the world smaller, and I think it's also presented options. And I'll say this: the worship music, I think has drastically changed in the last 12 to 18 months. And Maverick City music, they've been able to flow within multiple like camps, which is really interesting. But two, the way their experience is, where it's not a stage, like we're up here on the stage and then everybody's down here. Like their videos it's like a circle. So it's like people in the center, and then there's like the circle extends.
Yeah.
And I think we can see like different arrangements of how stuff goes, right? Maverick City music also doesn't it's a little raw. Like it looks cool on YouTube, but like when I've listened to it and I like thrown on in the car and listen, like, oh, like these mixes are kind of like rough. Like some of this stuff doesn't sound as polished as what we're used to. But that's one of the appeals of it, right? So I think what will happen is my prediction is I think we'll see something similar with church in that regard. I think we're gonna move further and further away from like mega church, glitz glam, Coachella church to like a more hey, let's do the circle church. Let's not just have one guy, let's all share. Like I think something like that could happen in our lifetime, and there'd be this pivot, and some of it might even be like I watch here, but they have an extended small group, or they have an extended group that meets at parks, right? That's like my small group started meeting outdoors because of the pandemic. And then it was kind of like, yo, this is kind of fire, like barbecue and have church. Like this is doper than like sitting in a living room. So I think all of that's going to get rethought, but I don't know. I'm with you, man. I don't know how the Sunday morning doesn't need to look.
I also, let me say something else. I'm not smart, but I talk to a lot of people who are smarter than I am. I had a really interesting conversation with my friend's father, who's a farmer. And they have goats and donkeys and chickens on their farm, and they make soap. And I was telling him, we were working at my house, and I was like, hey, what is it that we all have this one experience of, like, I was a part of a church community, and oh my God, it was awesome. And and Ruslan was there, and then this is back, and so and so was there, and we had somebody else there too, and there was just this magical time that like just everything aligned. And we all were able to be a part of a ministry, a church, a youth group, a camp, a conference, and then all of a sudden we all have to leave. And then or hey, well, why do we all? And I was asking like, why do we all have this one experience? And he was talking about just like the Bible has so many analogies of shepherds and cleaning and what it takes to take care of a flock or a herd. And it is messy, and sheep also they walk off, they wander away, they fall off cliffs, they need to be found. Some of the herd they die off. Some people go somewhere else. So there isn't this. When we talk about church, I don't know if there's like a magical the number's 249. Don't ask me why. It's a building with the air is just right. The sound system is only one microphone, and we all worship in a circle. Like I don't think we can bullet point out what this is supposed to be, because after a while, as people mature and you have young kids, I have young kids. All of a sudden now I'm like, well, what does church need to look like for my son and my daughter, who are both of our daughters are named Zoe, by the way. But what is that supposed to look like? When I turn, my friend's dad, Mr. John, he's older.
Yeah.
What he's seeking from a church, what he's seeking from a community is different from what I'm seeking from a church body.
Yeah.
And so as those things evolve, I think communities also change and the leaderships also evolve and grow and change and their priorities change. And I'm just thankful personally, when I got fired from a church, I remember thinking I need to start my own church. And I cannot thank God
you wild
that I did not start my own church, because bro, that would have been horrible. That would have been horrible. But I'm thankful for other people who who have taken that step and started communities, and then also just tried stuff. Hey, let's meet outside.
Yeah.
Hey, this small group is getting too big. Let's make it smaller. Hey, I think we can add some more people. Let's make it bigger. I think all of those things of like trial and error and then maybe let's try this. My friend told me he had been a part of a small group that he'd been raving about for a long time, and he said, hey, they had to make a decision in the small group, and I thought, wow. And the way he made it sound, I was like, wow, this sounds like a death. Him and his wife were over. My wife and I, we were hosting them, and we're like, wow, this sounds like a death. And he was like, yeah, like we've been, our kids, we've babysat each other's kids, we've been to each other's weddings, and so I'm like, what is? Now I'm thinking like, hey, is God a part of that? Well, yeah, God kind of knows the end from the beginning of things, and He knew that those people were going to be together for that period of time, and He knew, the differences that they were going to all face to split them all up. But the time that they spent together, still valuable. You know what I mean? Like, still valuable.
Yeah, that's so good. Okay, we're going to end with this last question from a man, Kanan. He said, question for Shama. He said, what are the pros and cons of deconstruction? This is a really good question.
Yeah. For me, I'm going to speak. For me, I just remember thinking, wow, like, if this God thing is real, if the Bible is real, if these songs that I've been singing my whole life are real, then I need to find out what this is all about for me. I really need to sink my teeth into this. Yeah. I've been drugged to church. Somebody's, oh, you're going to a camp. I've been to the camps. I've been to the conferences. I've been the guy on front of the conferences. I've been the guy helping run I've been in all those different seats. And then finally, I remember just sitting in my room watching, I'm just going through so many books, and I'm not going to name some of the authors because I don't want that to be like a stumbling block, whatever you believe. And some of those people are controversial right now, but finding books and sermons and blogs and podcasts and all these different things. And I was like, wow, okay, now it was just like a tool for my toolbox. Just like, okay, now I understand that a little better. Now I understand the grace of God better. Now I understand love. Now I understand, love, sex, and marriage better. And I think about a series that was really helpful in that regard. And then I think about a sermon that my pastor said last Sunday. And then I think about a book, a chapter of a book that was just radically eye-opening. So when I started just kind of like, okay, I want to learn these things. I want to ask these questions. And I'm still buying people lunch, and I'm like, hey, are you free? Let's sit down and talk. Hey, this is where I'm at. This is where I'm at. Can I be real with you? This is where I'm at. And discussing those things, that has been just eye-opening for me. Just extremely eye-opening for me. That was just, if you make that decision, I don't think anybody, and you're around people who aren't going to like stop you and be like, Ruslan, flying too close to the sun, buddy. If people, in your community, are like, hey, let's talk. Let's talk for real. Hey, I've been through that. Where you find a speaker, nobody's perfect. No author is perfect. No sermon is perfect. No series is perfect. But there are things that you can glean and learn and feed off of from all these different portions, and that all just kind of helps, snowballs into a solid understanding of God, a more solid understanding of church, and then sometimes the snowball. Not saying that it continually rolls. There's no gravity in this thing, so sometimes it goes back up hill, and and you lose some snow, and then you pick up, what I mean, like, and then you gain more momentum, and then sometimes it's slower, which nobody else taught me that. Like, there was a time when I was just super in tune, and I spent all the time listening to podcasts and things. I got 2 kids now. I was going to walk out the door today to go to the gym, and my son is like, Dad. And I'm like, all right, cool. Your mom's sleeping. I'm not going to the gym, So things kind of change with life, and it's okay to change with those and to learn. Yeah, that's all I'll say, man. It's just, it's a process, and it's beautiful. Like once you embark on it, I believe that it's extremely beautiful, and I love being a part of it.
Generally speaking, are you optimistic, hopeful for where things are going in the future of this whole thing we're talking about, or are you kind of more, I don't know.
I go back and forth. Sometimes when like a conversation like this, I might get a couple of messages and be like, wow, future's looking bright. And then I got some invitations right now in my inbox that I might go to some churches. And then when I'm in the back of a church or in a green room or on the side of a stage or sitting in the audience, and then I see, the circus.
The stuff you make fun of on your Instagram.
I was at an event a couple weeks ago, and like I stepped out and somebody texted me and goes, yo, the loose cannon guest speaker's best friend is in here preaching. And I step in, I'm like, wow. So when I see that, like when I see the circus, then I'm like, wow, okay. Time to hole up for a bit at the house and not go anywhere. But yeah, I'll have a good conversation. I'm like, wow, God is so good. And then I'll, experience something like that. And I'm like, wow, is God still so good? I don't.
I think if we own the things that make us different, I'm very hopeful. I think what's happening right now from my vantage point is there's a convolution of everyone kind of being in this like evangelical label.
Yeah.
And I think that label is like way too broad. So it's like, regardless of where you fall, like folks watch this channel, a lot of folks that watch this channel, like super fundy, super fundamentalist, like respect, man. But just know what you are, like know what you are and own it. And then there's folks that like my fundamentalist acquaintance, Spencer Smith. I don't know if you've ever watched Spencer Smith on YouTube. He's a handful. He's like a fundamentalist Baptist, like hates culture, hates the world. And he called me a neo-evangelical. And I never had heard that phrase until he called me that. He said, you're a neo-evangelical. And I was like, what is a neo-evangelical? And he's like, yeah, you're like you're like what Billy Graham is, but like the newer version of that. And then then I saw Phil Vischer, who is an acquaintance of yours, to make a video about the difference between neo-evangelicals and fundamentalists. And I think if people are clear on like what it is you are and where do you fall in line, right? Even just like, yo, I'm a follower of Jesus. I'm not 1,000-point Calvinist. Like I'm a follower of Jesus. Like I'm not that. I think if there's distinction so that we know, I'm very hopeful. I think when there isn't distinction and everything is convoluted and everything's mad confusing and you like, am I talking to someone like you or am I talking to someone on some QAnon energy? Because those are two vastly different perspectives on just about everything. You know what I mean? And I think when they get convoluted, then I'm like, oh man, if this is the future of like the church in America, I'm bummed.
Let me say something. When I got married in 2018 to my beautiful wife, Grace. We have 2 kids now, Ezra and Zoe. A couple days before our wedding, was at work. And my boss at the time, Chris Frank, the production company that I worked at, he was asking me, hey, are you ready? Are we going? My wife and I were going to Europe for our honeymoon. We were excited. And it was like, I don't even know what prompted this. He just goes, hey, something is going to go wrong at your wedding. Just know that. Everything like, what? He's like, yeah, no wedding's perfect. However much you prepare, something is going to go wrong. Just be okay with that. And then like clockwork, like he said, we show up to the church. I show up to the church. I'm getting ready, and the sound guy comes up, and my wife had made she'd put she had like a USB drive, like a thumb drive with music, the songs that she wanted to go into, and I put them into a playlist. And I hand it to the guy who was like, hey, I'm going to be running sound for you. An older gentleman with a ponytail. And I hand it to him. And I'm like, hey, this is intro music's on there. And then he goes, what am I supposed to do with this?
Okay.
And immediately I thought back to what Chris said, and I was like, this is it. And I just remember laughing, and I was like, hey, let me go up. I'll help you. So now I'm like in my suit. My wife, now my fiance at the time, she's not there. People are kind of streaming in, and I'm up there trying to help this guy, open up a thumb drive. This is 2018. Just open up a thumb drive. But I think that understanding, having been prompted, that helps me out a lot. And I'm going to say this right now, and I feel like it's pertinent. No church, and I'm saying this for me too. No church service is going to be perfect. No camp or conference or event's going to be perfect.
Come on.
And that's okay. That's okay. But just know that kind of going in, like no community group's going to be perfect. Man, we know now, no leader, no pastor, author, none of those people are going to be perfect. Knowing that kind of, I think it kind of gets you to kind of lower your expectations of what a church service is supposed to be, what a body of Christ is supposed to be, what a community is supposed to be, what kind of content is supposed to be, what kind of songs are supposed to be written. Like there's like it's a piece of a whole, and the wholeness it's not going to happen on earth,
Yeah.
The wholeness
Mic drop, man. Mic drop, bro. That was come on, somebody. That was perfect. What a perfect way to end this conversation, bro. Thank you so much, guys. Go follow on all the platforms. I'm hoping my buddy Zach just got here. I'm hoping we're gonna figure out a way to do some of these in person because I think that would be super fun, man. So hopefully we get out to you.
Absolutely, man. If I'll come to you, man, I want to see the setup, dude. I'm trying to see the layer.
You got it. Maybe we'll plan an event together. Maybe we'll do like a fun event and like plan an event and then shoot a bunch of stuff around the event and have that'd be dope, bro. Thank you so much, man. Like just know that above all else, like I find true joy from watching your content. Like I really do. Like I'm like, oh man, like I'm genuinely happy. Like you make me smile, man, and it means a lot, and it's stuff like I could just pass around. I could share with my wife or my friends, and I think you're doing good work, bro. And I think I'm so humbled that first of all I'm pumped that like you even know who I am because like you're the because just like I'm saying this because like creative people, like people who have a voice, people who are tapped into where things are going. I think it just means a lot, man. So thank you for doing this, brother. I can't wait to build more with you. Go ahead.
I am supported by a team of amazing people here in Greenville. My manager, PD, he's awesome. Director Robert Chase, Bridges, Andrew Simmons, who does all our music, Tony Pals. Like there are so many awesome creators that God has just really kind of gathered us together, and every time like we shoot something, we make something, we're at like a lunch or a dinner or something, and I look around, I always just say, man, they should have never let us meet, I think,
yeah, man.
I don't know who they are.
The channel is after school. It's after school program. It's in the title of this video and in the description. So go subscribe there, and then obviously your Instagram. But thank you so much, man. This was incredible. Thank you, brother.
Kingstream Entertainment. Ruslan.
Thank you so much for making it to the end of this video. If you found it valuable, considering giving it a like and subscribing. This month, I'm releasing the Love What You Do collection, and to celebrate, I'm doing a 3-day virtual event to help us go from learning to love what we do to ultimately doing what we love. By the way, it's free, so hit the link in the description to grab your seat today.